Over 2,300 years ago, the Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi dreamt of being a butterfly. When he awoke, he thought, "Now I do not know if I was a man dreaming I was a butterfly, or if I am now a butterfly dreaming I am a man." The butterfly. It is a symbol that appears in almost every culture. The ancient Egyptians believed the butterfly represented the departures of the souls of the dead. In old Japan, the butterfly represented the souls of the living. Similar connections can be found among the Greeks, the Romans, the Aztecs, the Maori, many Native American groups, and in Scottish and Irish folklore. The Swiss psychologist Ernst Appli, who studied with Carl Jung, wrote a book in 1943 entitled Der Traum seine Deutung, The Dream and Its Interpretation, in which he observed, "The miracle of its successive life stages, of metamorphosis from the larval existence of the plodding caterpillar to the delicate beauty of the butterfly, has moved us deeply, becoming a metaphor for the transformations undergone by our own souls. This is one source of our hope that we may one day leave behind our terrestrial prison and ascend into the eternal light of the heavens." I agree, the butterfly is such a potent symbol for that reason, but also because it is so delicate, so easily broken. Most butterflies live only a couple of weeks, and then they're gone. More recently, a new concept has become associated with the butterfly, what is known as the butterfly effect, a term defined in 1961 by Edward Lorenz, an American mathematician and meteorologist. The idea is simple. Somewhere in Africa, a butterfly flaps its wings. That tiny movement of air sets into motion a chain of events that can manifest a week or more later, far away, in the form of a massive and destructive tornado. Things are connected. Sometimes very small things can produce big results. Then again, sometimes very big things can turn out to be rather small. Ambrose Bierce was an American author at the end of the 19th century, best known for a story, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, published in 1890. Many years later, in 1962, the French director Robert Enrico turned it into a short film, which won an Academy Award. The story takes place during the American Civil War. A man stands on the edge of a bridge with a rope around his neck. He is about to be hanged. He is pushed from the bridge, but the rope breaks, and he falls into the river below, and dodging the gunfire from overhead, he swims to freedom. He runs through the woods for many hours, and at the end of the day, he arrives back at his own home, where he sees his wife standing at the front door. He runs to embrace her. And at that moment, as Bierce describes it, there is a loud noise and a flash of white, and everything goes black. His neck breaks as the hanging concludes. In 1913, Ambrose Bierce took a trip to Mexico and was never seen again. Presumably, he died. Or perhaps he simply woke up. So, you're walking down the street, or perhaps standing in a crowded room, and you spot a friend from behind. And you move closer, and just as you're about to call out their name, the person turns around, and it's not your friend. It's someone else entirely. And for just an instant, those two things share a place in reality. It is your friend, and it's not. And in that fleeting moment, something astonishing and impossible has taken place. It would be wonderful and terrifying to extend that moment. It would be magic. That is our topic. In modern times, the word magic has become corrupted. For many, perhaps most contemporary people, the word magic immediately brings to mind something nice for the children. But I'm here to say that magic is not for children, and in fact, quite often it is not nice. To the modern world, there is an association between magic and puzzles. The distinction between the two has become blurred. This confusion is understandable. After all, both disciplines would seem to have the same starting point for their explorations: mystery. And mystery is an important, I would say essential, element for a life worth living. But there are different types of mystery. Some mysteries are meant to be solved. Some mysteries are meant to be savored. I reside in the latter camp. It is, in fact, the older camp. After all, magic is the world's third oldest profession. Advertising. Despite these deep roots that span tens of millennia, the magicians of the 20th century were able to accomplish something quite extraordinary. In the space of less than 100 years, they managed to take something that is inherently profound and render it trivial. I believe, I imagine, that there is something left to reclaim. And I say this fully aware of the comment made by the British logician Bertrand Russell. One of the symptoms of an approaching nervous breakdown is the belief that one's work is terribly important. But magic is important, or at least it was. Let me try to explain. We begin with the premise that all human activity can be classified into two basic categories: that which we have to do and that which we want to do. Of course, the two are not mutually exclusive. I can illustrate the difference this way. I have to eat. I want to eat steak. Okay, the activities which primarily reside in the have-to category include securing a source for food and water, a place to sleep, protection from external harm, and some aspects of sex. For the purposes of this discussion, ignore those. Instead, let's expand the premise to state that once a person has managed to take care of these things in the first category, he or she is free to explore the far more interesting possibilities of the second category. They're more interesting because they involve an immense set of opportunities for choices and a wider range of motivations, hence a deeper meaning for the doer. For lack of a better term, we'll refer to these endeavors as life explorations. People have struggled for centuries to determine the purpose of life. Myself, I'm not at all convinced that there is one. However, I believe that our species has a built-in need to create such purposes. And when you get right down to it, that's precisely what these life explorations are. These activities can, in turn, be broken down into three basic areas. Natural, the exploration of one's physical surroundings. Aesthetic, the exploration of one's emotional surroundings. Spiritual, the exploration of one's metaphysical surroundings. Of course, these overlap. An activity can involve elements from all three areas. Now picture a triangle, with one of these areas located at each corner. Any form of life exploration can be placed somewhere on this diagram. For example, the work of a chemical engineer might be positioned firmly in the N corner. If, however, that person's approach to chemistry incorporates an appreciation for the harmonious patterns which can be found therein, that work might more accurately be shown thusly. Or perhaps the chemist's efforts are toward altruistic medical research, in which case the position might be more properly shown as this. But given our current discussion, the obvious question is, where does the art of performance magic fit into this theorem? I contend that it fits here. Now, does all performance magic reach this perfectly centralized position? Of course not. But at its best, I maintain that such an impeccable balance is indeed achieved. Moreover, I claim that magic is the only form of life exploration which can spontaneously find that center based purely on its intrinsic qualities. Our chemist could steer to the center, but it would be the result of deliberate effort and delicate maneuvering. What is so extraordinary about this unique art of ours is that such positioning comes about organically. As a magician's work evolves and improves, it automatically centers. What do you suppose that means? Throughout human history, in virtually every culture in every part of the world, as a society develops form, a specific position within the community evolves into being, a position for someone who guides and represents the people in their life explorations. Anthropologists call that person a shaman. The word likely has Proto-Indo-European roots, evolving through ancient Chinese and Sanskrit, passing through the Tungusic languages of what is now Siberia, through Russian and German, until now it is a fairly universal term for a fairly universal thing. And those areas of life exploration coexisted quite comfortably under the guidance and leadership of the shaman. But over time, that singular shamanic concept split into three things. The exploration of the natural world became science and technology. The exploration of the aesthetic world became refined craft and art. The exploration of the metaphysical world became religion and philosophy. One unified thing became three, and over time those three became less obviously connected, more often conceived as independent of one another. But that separation took a long time, and for a while there was still an easily perceived connecting tissue between these three things, and that connecting tissue was mystery. In a bygone era, mystery was one of the commodities offered by scientists, artists, and theologians. But as societies have progressed, or at least moved in different directions, those roles have changed. In a speech delivered in New York in 1954, the physicist Robert Oppenheimer said, "Both the man of science and the man of art live always at the edge of mystery." But most scientists, and most artists, have lost this concept. As for modern religions, they have become rigid dispensaries of answers, with very little room for questions. Most of what is provided from those sources is didactic and/or instructional. Mystery is thus defined as something that threatens authority. As such, it must be conquered or bypassed, not welcomed. The British author Arthur C. Clarke famously wrote, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." At one time that was true, but in our 21st century world, technology has vastly expanded its presence in our daily lives, and it is a basic trait of our species that we assimilate these advances with fierce rapidity. As a result, with all due respect to Mr. Clarke, that statement is no longer true. Having lost the ability to perceive mystery, we can no longer conflate technology and magic. It is for this reason that now, more than ever, the role of the theatrical conjurer has importance and value. As magicians, we can reintroduce our audiences to mystery, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as something insoluble and therefore profound. Something that, when embraced, can fill an important void within us, thus enhancing our lives. It is a daunting responsibility. Of course, all of this provokes a question. Am I drawn to magic because it is important in a philosophical way, or do I invent reasons for its importance because I am drawn to magic? I would like to believe that the first answer is correct. However, I cannot help but wonder if at this very moment there is a plumber recording a narrative for a plumbing DVD discussing the reasons why plumbing is important in a philosophical way. Perhaps I believe that magic is important because I must believe that, to justify my lifetime commitment. But if that is so, it means that my commitment is an example of faith, belief that transcends proof. So I shall doggedly persist in enthusiastic agreement with the Spanish poet Federico Garcia Lorca when he proclaimed, "Only mystery enables us to live. Only mystery." That may seem like an overstatement, but perspective is provided by listening to the Argentine literary master Jorge Luis Borges. There is nothing in the world that is not mysterious, but the mystery is more evident in certain things than in others. That is what I am searching for with magic, not tricks. Tricks are about objects. Magic is about life. Great magic does not come from the distribution of tricks, any more than great painting comes from the distribution of brushes. Over the past 5 decades or so, I have tried very hard to come up with a succinct yet functional definition for theatrical magic. Here's the closest I've managed to produce. Magic is the aesthetic exploration of mystery. But sadly, in recent times, the word mystery in the English language has also become corrupted, distorted. I wish we had a better word to play off of. Maybe something in between the Japanese fushigi and the Spanish duende. An approach to mystery along the lines of what the German writer Goethe said in trying to describe the Italian violinist Paganini some 200 years ago. A mysterious power which everyone senses and no philosopher explains. I suppose we could try to introduce new forms of nomenclature, but it's probably too late. After so many years, some cultural tropes are too deeply ingrained. So the solution seems to be to rethink one's own approach to mystery, to attempt to teach by example. There are those who think that magic is about secrets. To some extent, it is, but those secrets are really tools for building our magic, not the end result itself. The American illusion creator Jim Steinmeier has stated that magicians are guarding an empty safe. I like that concept. However, I think the safe is not empty. But much of the contents is less than valuable, and the safe is not actually locked. Oh, and the good stuff is being stored somewhere else. Because you see, magic is victimized by its secrecy. Now bear in mind, magic is hardly alone in possessing secrets. As the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw noted long ago, every profession is a conspiracy against the laity. Doctors have secrets. Lawyers have secrets. Tap dancers have secrets. Professional wrestlers have really good secrets. But only magicians wear their secrecy on their sleeves, pushing the existence of those secrets so far to the front that they cannot be ignored. And in turn, this severely damages the interface between the magician and the audience. The viewers are led, incorrectly but inevitably, to a false definition of what constitutes good magic. Simply that it worked. If the hat is shown convincingly empty, and there are no awkward movements, no flashes of hidden mirrors or dark cloths, then when the rabbit appears, the trick is judged as being good. But this is the equivalent of getting the notes in the right order. That's not what makes good music. Rather, it is the start of making good music. And to me, aside from the triangular map, there is really only one difference between magic and other forms of artistic expression. Consider painting. You can make a list of the elements that go into a painter's work: color, texture, space, stroke, size, and many others. And somewhere on that list is mystery. In most cases, it is not near the top of the list, nor is it a mandatory component, but it is there as an option. Or in music, the list includes rhythm, harmony, discord, melisma, silence, and so on. And again, somewhere on the list is mystery, which may or may not be employed. In the creation of magic, all of those same elements are available. A magician may make use of color, rhythm, silence, space, and everything else, but at the very top of the magician's list is mystery. It is indispensable. So, how do we make good magic, or at least begin to do so? That seems to be a complex task. As the American conjuring theorist Robert Neal has observed, there are many magics. My friend Eugene Berger put it oh so nicely when he said, "The house of magic has many rooms." To which I always append, not all of them decorated to the same level of taste. But as appealing as Eugene's metaphor may be, perhaps it is incorrect and thus misleading. I know, heresy. Perhaps the house of magic does not have many rooms. What if instead there is only one room, a very, very big room, and different locations in that vast interior are designated, defined, labeled as if they were separate rooms, but without actual walls? This could explain why some magicians, arguably the most interesting ones, seem able to simultaneously reside in more than one room. The walls themselves are an illusion. But we can explore those illusory walls another time. Today, I want to get out of the house, because that is where magicians intersect with their audiences. And it is only there, if you subscribe to Duchampian art theory, that magic can be fully realized, fully made to exist. So we'll return to the earlier question. How do we create good magic? I do not have the answer. But that's okay, because I have some pretty good questions. And again, at its core, magic has always been more about questions than about answers. Mind you, I think we need to proceed with a certain amount of caution. Context itself can be a trap. Consider the American psychologist Abraham Maslow's celebrated observation, when the only tool you possess is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Well, yes, but Maslow overlooked the fact that there's more than one way to use a hammer. I think you understand what I'm trying to accomplish here, but I may be being overly optimistic. Returning to George Bernard Shaw, I cite his observation that the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. But I actually am an optimist. Well, I'm a pragmatic optimist. The glass is a quarter full. I think you do need a certain amount of optimism to sustain our type of quest. Finding and creating and sharing true mystery has an impractical work ratio. It's like panning for gold. A day, a week, a month or more may yield just a few grains of the elusive stuff. But perhaps that's okay. Perhaps the deeper mysteries are not meant to sustain. Maybe it's better if they have just a glimmer of existence. A glimmer could be enough. Maybe some things in life are not meant to sustain, and not only butterflies. Let's remember, the French refer to orgasm as la petite mort, the little death. If one of those sustains too long, it becomes simply death. So let's imagine that we can share, we can collectively possess such a moment, no matter how fleeting it may be, and no matter how much effort it takes to get there. Why? Well, if you are truly a magician, the answer is clear. There is simply no other choice. In 1899, the Japanese essayist Goro Shimizu published the following. The translation is by Marguerite Wells. Ah, the trilling of the nightingale. It trills, not because it wants to trill, but because it reaches the point where it cannot but trill. Water flows, not because it wants to flow, but because it reaches the point where it cannot but flow, and so it flows. And just as a poet puts sentences together, and a painter wields his brush, if an artist makes up his mind to fly beyond the circular dome of the heavens, or to consign his body to absolute solitude, then divine ideas will rain down upon him from the vast darkness of the universe. And sometimes, in a flash, there is the ring of gold, and sometimes the sense of the sound of onrushing thunder. At such a moment, there is no heaven or earth. All is one, and all there is truth, dancing on the tip of the artist's pen. You know, sometimes a butterfly in Africa flaps its wings, and as a result, nothing of any significance happens anywhere. Perhaps now I'll wake up.
Hi.
I'm a clairvoyant. I've been a professional psychic for 23 years. The way I read
There are
people.
cycles in your life, all the lines that cross over from the thumb into your lifetime.
Here we have the devil, and whenever that card comes up, I always refer to it as a card of...
Throughout history, we have wanted to go beyond the limits of our own minds and break through the boundaries of space and time. From the ancient oracle to the vaudeville stage, all the way to the psychic fair, those who claim they possess these powers have been worshipped as gods or damned as frauds. There has been a long tradition of those who say that not only can they predict the future, but that they can read minds and influence people and events in inexplicable ways. Our craving to unravel these mysteries draws us to those who apparently exhibit extraordinary powers. They're not just comic book heroes or villains, but real flesh and blood human beings. Meet my friend, Max Maven.
Together for the next few moments, we are going to explore some of the mysteries of the human mind. And I'm going to involve some members of this audience in some games of mind-to-mind contact. In a moment, one of you is going to feel that he or she is holding the key that works.
Max is an entertainer, a performer. But are these demonstrations just clever tricks?
Vertical up like this, one down like this, one more like this, and then down like that. That's a capital M, and I thank you very much.
Certainly his work is well respected by magicians. When I heard that Max was coming to Toronto to perform and to be honored by some of the brightest minds among illusionists and conjurers, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to begin my investigation into the mysterious mind of Max Maven.
As human beings, our species is hardwired to understand the existence of mystery.
It's fantastic. I have no idea how he did any of that. Absolutely none.
It's a life-changing experience. I'll have trouble sleeping tonight. I'm serious. I mean, there has to be a plausible explanation for it.
Donna, can I give you this?
I know that there's a lot of people who thought that what you do is real, that you can read people's minds. So how do you respond to that?
Well, your question presumes that I can't.
I would like you to tie this around my head as tightly as you wish. Go ahead. You can pull it tighter than that. Martha, taking my life into my hands, dig around in that handbag, take out something.
Okay.
I heard footsteps.
Yes.
Is there something there?
I'm here. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I would say this one is less than an inch across.
Yes.
Actually, less than half an inch across.
Yes.
I would say approximately a centimeter. This has more than one substance, more than one color.
Yes.
There is metal.
Yes.
It is gold?
Yes.
I mean real gold.
Yes.
You pull it open to get to what's inside. Is it a pen? I'm going to go for it. Is it a Mont Blanc?
Yes. Wow.
Besides his performance, Max was the guest of honor at a conference hosted by Magicana, an organization dedicated to the art of magic. His contribution to this art has been significant.
He's created over 2,000 magical effects for magicians to perform.
He is probably, if not the most prolific inventor within magic, he's got to be among the top 3 or 4.
At this time, there is no one who has, in any language, published more effects, the how-to of impossible things.
You know, is it a magic show, a mind reading show, a guy talking for 2 hours? Is it anecdotes? Is it?
He's created a brand new look for the genre of the mentalist or the mind reader.
You may draw anything you like. The only thing I will request is that you keep it relatively simple. Try not to do the Last Supper, okay? Now, Jacqueline, where are you? Okay, is the picture on the side I'm tapping?
No.
Okay, so now it is.
Yeah.
All right, because I want to keep it facing away from me. If you can grab that, I'm trying to get to you without pitching over. Have you got it? I've got it. Is it still facing away from me? It is. Thank you very much. Jacqueline, here you can go back to your seat. Little unexpected bonus for your performer. I could have met a lawyer. Access to secret knowledge is primal. Every person in any culture at any time in history has had the experience of looking at another person and saying, I wish I knew what they were thinking. From where you are, Jacqueline, I'm going to ask you to draw the picture again. The difference being that this time you will not use a pen. You will draw it with your mind. Look right here. All right. You're picturing this almost like it's hovering in between us. You can sort of see it floating in midair almost, yeah? And, no, that's much too big. I would say maybe about there. Is that about right?
Yes.
Don't be nervous. I'm not going to tell him any of the other stuff, just the picture. Am I holding this right side up? Now, a lot of people do happy faces. This is a happy face. He's happy, and his eyes are really dilated, which could explain why he's so damned happy. And if anybody has anything to say about it against him, doesn't matter. He's got no ears. So how these square glasses stay on is a mystery. One simple question. What was your motivation?
My husband.
Your husband. And she did it because it was a romantic thing. That was her motivation. I did it because it's how I make my living.
The type of performance Max does is not easy to define. He seems to know what someone else is thinking and what choices they will make. While blindfolded, he appears to see objects held behind him. Are any of these mysteries real, or are they simply the tricks of a skilled conjurer?
If a person thinks that everything that I'm doing is exactly what it appears to be, then they're wrong. On the other hand, if the person watching me assumes that everything I do is fabricated and fraudulent, they're also wrong. Because what I'm doing is something in the middle. And exactly where in the middle is not my problem, is it?
We thought, you know, you don't have to be
of a certain vintage to be an honored guest. It's okay to honor.
How about interviewer?
And you are?
For this special event in Toronto, who better to interview the guest of honor than Patrick Watson, one of Canada's foremost journalists and broadcasters, as well as a founder of Magicana.
There is a body of thought in the mentalism community that says the only truly generous attitude towards your audience is that in which you let them know at the beginning that this is all fraudulent and a trick, so that they will never be led to suspect that maybe this guy really is a mind reader. Talk about that.
Well, first of all, my attitude toward this issue of believability, which is a constant debate among mentalists and would-be mentalists, my attitude has changed over the years. I no longer care. I no longer care what the audience decides to define what I'm doing as being. The only thing I care about in that specific sense is that they acknowledge that what I'm doing is really difficult and I do it well. The full title of the show is Max Maven, Thinking in Person, an evening of knowing and not knowing. To me, knowing is a wonderful thing, but so is not knowing.
Tiffany, all you have to do is to call out the name of your favorite card nice and loud.
Six of Hearts.
The Six of Hearts. There's a popular favorite. Tiffany, I'm going to fan the cards out so that the back of each and every card is exposed to you, and all you have to do is to tell me whether I begin from on your left or your right. The choice is yours.
My right.
From your right. I'll start moving my finger along from the right, Tiffany. Whenever you like, you call stop.
Stop.
Exactly there? The people sitting in the front, my finger is on the precise exact corner the young lady stopped me on. I have not moved over even a single card, correct?
I think there's a lot of high intuition going on here. And daring intuition, if I might add that. Daring.
Let me tweeze that card out so that we really know it is the same one, because Tiffany, you could have stopped me anywhere, over here, down here, back here. Instead, you chose to stop me here, just a little left of center.
That particular effect is exactly what it appears to be. It does not involve sleight of hand. It does not involve gimmicks. It does not involve stooges. It does not involve anything other than my contriving to have my finger on the corner of exactly the card she has named at the moment she says stop. And I don't miss.
Ever?
Not anymore.
Tiffany, a moment ago, you named a card. What card did you name? The Six of Hearts, which is precisely where you stopped me.
In his show, Max sets out to take us on a journey. A journey made all the richer by his wide-ranging and somewhat arcane interests.
You remember the British geneticist J.B.S. Haldane? To paraphrase Haldane, the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can imagine. You remember the Hungarian mathematician Paul Erdős? No, you should. I was performing in Shizuoka, Japan. And I promise this is really true. And after the show, a guy came up to me and he said, "Yappari honto ni ningen janai to omoimasu. Honto ni iti da." I guess you had to be there. You remember the Austrian physicist Wolfgang Pauli? Pauli once observed to a colleague, "Your theory isn't even wrong." You remember the Argentine poet Macedonia Fernandez? You people should get out less.
Max doesn't seek out these fields or these people or these subjects to be purposefully obtuse. Those are things he's really interested in, and those are things he really pursues. But there's the playful side of him that knows that instead of just standing in front of you and telling you stories, he'll play with you about, have you heard about this before?
Let me see if I can
sum this up. You remember the Japanese actor Ichikawa Danjuro? I refer, of course, to the first Danjuro, not any of the 11 generations since, but the one who flourished during the Genroku period at the end of the 17th century. Danjuro, of course, was one of the pioneers of kabuki theater, and he established what is now known as the Aragoto style, rough style. And his most famous play is still being performed today, albeit with variations. But the one primary scene of the play is still done. The name of the play takes its name from that moment, because the play is called Shibaraku, which loosely translates to, wait a minute. Now, in the play, there are some nefarious villains on stage engaged in some nefarious activities. And from the back of the house, a voice rings out. Let me show you. Shibaraku! This is what is referred to in kabuki theater as a mie, a peculiar rolling and locking pose that is quintessential to kabuki. But you have to appreciate this in its full glory. Danjuro is wearing an oversized kimono and wig. His face is striped red and white in the kumadori style. And he is walking on wooden geta sandals over 10 inches high, carrying a sword over 6 feet long. He makes his way from the back of the house down the Hanamichi runway, and when he reaches the center, he stops and repeats himself. Shibaraku! Now, the question most of you are asking yourselves is, what sort of nefarious activity are those villains engaged in that would warrant such a reaction? But I think that is the wrong question. I think the right question is, what can we do to create our own Shibaraku moments this evening?
It takes a while, I think, for the audience to get with him. Because in my experience is that the audience says, he's pretty strange, but I like him. And there's something happening here that's kind of interesting, deeply interesting.
Of all the animals on land or in the air, the spiny anteater is the only one that does not dream. Shibaraku.
There are many things in the show that give you different facets of Max. The one that hits everyone over the head is the fact that he is an unabashed intellectual. And those who are tend to either huddle in small groups or they don't go out and proclaim it as boldly as Max does.
The word wizard is alphabetically symmetrical. W is the fourth letter from the end of the alphabet. D is the fourth letter from the beginning. I is the ninth letter from the beginning of the alphabet. R is the ninth letter from the end. And of course, A is the first letter. Z is the last. The strange part is not that it exists, it's how did anyone notice? Shibaraku.
The journey Max takes us on has ancient roots. It's a path we all explore in a variety of ways.
One is exploring the physical world, what we now think of as science and technology. One of them is exploring the aesthetic world, what we now call art and entertainment. And one is exploring the metaphysical world, what we now consider to be philosophy, theology. And there was a time, thousands of years ago, when all of these three things were basically the same thing. And the people who were at the center of this are what we now call shamans. Metaphorically, the shaman ascends to heaven, receives wisdom on behalf of the tribe, and then comes back and shares it, except that inevitably he has to go through hell first before he gets to go home. And this basic story, whether it's told in the form of Jack and the Beanstalk or told in the form of Jesus of Nazareth, is a quintessential story. And at some point, one aspect of the shaman's gig became compartmentalized, and that was the aspect of this mystical contact, of finding out secret information. And then when show business comes into existence, it's not surprising that there's an offshoot of this that is taken onto the stage. You have performers who are presenting themselves as mystics, as psychics, as soothsayers. The end result is that you have what has now become known as mentalism.
Some of the earliest performers who brought these occult powers to the stage used subtle psychological principles to reveal the thoughts of their audiences. Whatever their methods, they set out to entertain as well as mystify.
Max has taken it well into the 20th and 21st century and developed it in directions that have never been gone in before.
La realidad trabaja en abierto misterio. Reality exists in overt mystery. And I think this is so, but only if the mystery is perceived. Otherwise, reality exists in covert mystery. So I feel that part of my job is not only to create mystery, but to bring it to your attention.
There's a profound difference between the performance of a set of events which you are clearly in control of, and therefore certainly not mysterious to you, and the kind of mystery that the astronomer confronts when he tries to think about what's beyond the finitude of the universe.
I would disagree with that,
Okay.
Patrick, because I've got a universe sitting in front of me on a given show that consists of mysterious things that are more mysterious in some ways than twinkling lights in the sky. I don't know what spectators are going to do.
It's important that we get someone who really knows his or her way around a deck of cards. So you play cards?
Yeah.
Okay. What's your game?
Asshole.
You know, I'm just going to assume that's a Canadian thing and move on. Take your left forefinger, Haley, and just touch a card as I spread through them. Just slam down. Okay, take it. Actually, take a whole bunch. 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever you got. Okay? Now, Haley, I need you to rest your knuckles on my back or I can't do this. Knuckles on the back. That would be my shoulders. Given the title of your favorite game, I thought you knew something about anatomy.
What's very surprising to many people is to know that someone as skilled as he is in this area has things that they can see and feel and know that essentially tell them what that person is thinking and what choices they are going to make.
It is the four of... No, I'm sorry. Okay, as I started to say four, you thought to yourself, wrong. It's not precisely the word she used, but I'm the one talking out loud.
Max really focused on what is the process, allowing us to see more of the manifestation and the system and the means by which he's figuring out what it is they're thinking and how they're deciding and how those thoughts are changing and when they've stopped thinking.
I want you to look at those cards and decide which one you like the most. Do you have it in mind? Sure. I believe I do as well. It is a higher value. It is a picture card.
Yep.
It is red.
Yes.
If it is red, it cannot simultaneously be a spade. They don't make them that way. Did you look over to the other card?
Yeah. No, I didn't.
Haley, put the other card behind that red card so that you are only looking at one card. Thank you. It is a diamond.
Yeah.
Don't say anything out loud. Jack, Queen, King. Don't say anything out loud. Queen, King, Queen, King. Queen of diamonds. I suppose at this point I should answer a question that has occurred to quite a number of you, which is, if you can do this, Max, why don't you go to the casinos and play blackjack? The answer is I would, but it's so difficult to get a dealer to stand behind me with his knuckles on my back.
That really kind of wonderful process of explicitly describing what's going on inside the head of a person standing behind him. You know, what but mind reading could that be?
Arrangements, and you took a bunch of cards, as many or as few as you wanted, from wherever you wanted. You stood behind me, you mixed them again, I called them off in the order you thought of. This is the card you saved for last, and I think you would have to agree that to get this same sequence of results would take literally millions of trials to get precisely the same thing to happen. Under those fair circumstances, what card did you save for last? Please, you can show me and everyone else. The 8 of spades. Everybody see that? The 8 of spades. Haley? Yeah. Millions of different sequences, all of which ended here. And the reason that's important has to do with that rather larger card that's been sitting on that chair since before I walked out on stage this evening. Now, Haley. See, this is the point where if I'm some sort of a carnival huckster or a Vegas lounge act, I would somehow surreptitiously switch it for a really big 8 of spades, right? But Haley, if I'm doing what I say, if I'm playing on a psychological playing field, then either that is the 8 of spades or it's wrong, and I'm not going to change it. Fair enough? In fact, Haley, if I'm not going to change the card, I don't even have to be the one who turns it over, correct? Correct. That's absolutely correct. In 1961, Harpo Marx published his autobiography, Harpo Speaks. I caught up with it a few years later when I was at a tender age on the brink of adolescence. That book changed my life. I learned a lot of things from Harpo Speaks. One of the things I learned is that it is possible for an autobiography to be taken over by a supporting character. In the case of Harpo Speaks, that was Alexander Woollcott. Now, the name may not be familiar to you, but there was a time when Alexander Woollcott was quite famous in North America. He was a critic, a writer, an essayist. In later years, he was a popular radio personality whose endorsement could turn a book into a bestseller overnight. He was a charter member of what became known as the Algonquin Set, a group of the brightest minds in literati of 1920s New York who would meet every day for lunch at the Algonquin Hotel and trade quips and barbs. Reviewing a play, Alexander Woollcott wrote, "The leading man should be taken out and gently but firmly shot at sunrise." About another play, he wrote, "The scenery was beautiful, but the actors got in front of it." To give you an indication of Woollcott's impact on North American culture, in 1939, there was a hit Broadway comedy that has been later made into a movie several times and revived on Broadway called The Man Who Came to Dinner. And in the original version, it starred Monty Woolley in the role of Sheridan Whiteside, a role based on Alexander Woollcott. Is there a man who suffers as I do from the gross inadequacies of the human race? That was my Monty Woolley impression. Now, when Alexander Woollcott was at a tender age, on the brink of adolescence, he attended a children's birthday party and they played a very curious game. Each child was given a slip of paper and a pencil and asked to write down what he or she wanted to be when they grew up. The idea was to try to guess who wanted to be what. As you can imagine, most of the kids wrote down doctor, fireman, ballerina. And we can assume that few, if any of them, actually grew up to be what they had written on their papers. Except for Alexander Woollcott, who grew up to be precisely what he had written on his paper. Because what he had put down was, "I would rather be a fabulous monster." And so it was that when I was at a tender age on the brink of adolescence, I found a role model.
I like paradox. I like contrast. I like things that do not necessarily pin down easily. And this has been the case since I was a kid. I've always been drawn, as early as I can remember, I've been drawn to things that are strange.
Max grew up with his 2 younger sisters in a suburb of Boston.
That I came from a very intellectual household. I grew up in a house filled with books and people who read them. My father was a physics professor, and he was the first person in his family's history to ever graduate college. And he was, in his family, he was like a king because he had succeeded on an academic and intellectual level, and that obviously had a great deal of effect on me.
Another thing that had a profound effect on Max was the social environment in which he grew up.
In many respects, I have spent my life as an outside person. I was physically smaller, I was swarthier, I was not athletically inclined, I just didn't fit in, and did not have an easy time of it. The vast majority of magicians get involved with magic somewhere between the ages of 7 and puberty, and they do so because they realize on some sort of instinctive level that magic is a very good coping mechanism for dealing with some form of social and or psychological maladjustment. And that was certainly the case with me. I used to imagine that one day a spaceship might land, and from the spaceship would emerge golden men who would say, "There you are. You're meant to be with us." Well, they never did show up, but I kind of managed to invent my own. In a way, I have embraced my otherness rather than trying to hide it.
Max's interest was not only in magic, but increasingly in demonstrating psychic powers, using whatever means would do the trick.
My initial contact with mentalism was primarily through books and magazines, and when I was a teenager, which is when I really started getting interested in this sort of thing, I started reading works by Theodor Annemann. He was a brilliant thinker, and he published a lot of material.
Annemann was a complex and troubled person. He was known to have very strong opinions, especially with respect to his greatest passion, the world of magic and mentalism. His life was brief and ended tragically, but Annemann's contribution to his art still resonates today.
I started reading and studying and in a way, conversing with Annemann, even though he was dead. Much of my life has been spent having dialogues with dead people.
Max was born with the name Phil Goldstein. Through his publications, he began to contribute to magic's vast repertoire of techniques. When he started performing professionally, Phil decided he needed a more interesting name.
He reinvented himself. At some point in his life, he chose a new name for himself, and he chose this look for himself, and these were meant to be the outward manifestations of what was going on inside of him.
This comes from a sort of classic Mephistophelian mode, but the most direct source was Ming the Merciless, the villain in the Flash Gordon comic strips.
What's really interesting to me is, over all these years, that he has chosen to stay with and to be true to this person that he chose to transform himself into Max Maven.
All that you get from me when you talk with me, when you see me perform, when you talk with me off stage, when you interact with me in any way, is me. This is not a costume or a false face. It's an extension of me. It's just that I've chosen to emphasize certain qualities and minimize certain others. So I would not say I invented a character, but rather I cultivated a character.
Once upon a time, Pablo Picasso had an exhibition, and he was approached by a photographer who was not amused. "This," said the photographer, "is not art. Look, over there you have a portrait of a woman with both eyes on one side of her nose. And that appears to be a half man, half horse. And the collection of right angles you claim represents a guitar. But this isn't art. This does not depict the real world." And he took out his wallet, and from it he removed a photograph which he gave to Picasso, saying, "This is a portrait of my wife, and it is exactly what she looks like." And Picasso observed, She's rather small."
Max has been inspired by many talented artists. One of them was Di Vernon, who was fondly referred to as the Professor.
Who is, in many ways, the father of modern close-up magic in the world. Not just in Canada and the United States, but in the world. Vernon brought naturalness to the world of sleight of hand.
He was interested in exploring the aesthetics involved in creating mystery theater, entertainment, magic, call it what you will.
He was a tremendous influence. You know, when Vernon came to New York, the center of magic was New York. And when Vernon moved to California, the center of magic moved in the United States to California. He was that important.
And most of the magicians who came out to Los Angeles to the Magic Castle, which is where he sort of held court, would discuss with him sleight of hand, gambling, artifice, and the like, all of which are interesting subjects, but we never talked about that. We talked about psychology. We talked about aesthetics. For that matter, we talked about religion and philosophy and history and lots of things. But I think that gave me a relationship with the professor that was a little different than most. Where he was really inspirational for me was, I don't think there was ever any question in his mind that this stuff had artistic profundity. You are going to play the part of Max Maven.
No.
Consider it an acting challenge. Now, this is the story of a dream that I had. I dreamt that I was sitting in a chair, facing forward, with my eyes closed. And what made the situation all the more disconcerting was the sense that I had that there was someone standing behind me. And yet, try as I may, I was unable to turn around and look. Now, here's where the dream became really scary, because a pair of hands came around either side of my head, and I heard a voice, a deep, attractive voice. And the voice said, "Name any card you see."
10 of diamonds.
The 10 of diamonds right here, you sure? Mm-hmm. Okay. A moment later, all of those staring people burst into applause, and I didn't know why.
I am a mystery artist. I lean toward the word mystery rather than magic, only because magic has become devalued as a word.
In what way?
Well, the extraordinary accomplishment of the magicians of the 20th century is that during the span of 100 years, they managed to take something that is inherently profound and render it trivial.
In my home, there is a magic box. It is rectangular. It sits 10 to 12 feet away from my desk. And if you place something inside that box and go away, when you come back 30 minutes later, that object is cold. I have no idea how this works. But if you persist in thinking of this as a refrigerator, then you have lost the perception of mystery.
I want my audience to go away with a different feeling about mystery and how it fits into their lives. Because I think we live in a time when, in our culture, in the West and particularly in North America, we assimilate things so quickly that mystery is almost lost, and we operate on this absurd presumption that we know everything. For me, the main purpose of life is finding out more. It's many times been the only thing that's kept me from suicide, is I'm too curious to see what happens next.
Are you being serious there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think I can honestly say that not a single day has gone by that I have not thought to myself, why am I putting myself through this? I should quit and do something easier. It's extremely frustrating and painful at times to be in an expressive art form that is explicitly a performing art form, because the potential for rejection is so high and the actual rejection is so frequent. You know, you are constantly being judged in a way that most people are not. But I believe that what I'm doing is really important, that it's really of value to the world that I find myself in. And maybe that's a fabrication. Maybe I'm just deluding myself into puffing up my importance by saying, yes, what I like to do is also important. But as far as I can tell, objectively, there is importance and significance to what I do. And at least a reasonable share of my audiences seem to figure that out and agree. And if we could, would you lower the prop? We're going to hang a very tiny person. This is the one place in the show where I say to several members of the audience, I'm going to put you in my position. I'm going to set you up so that in some way that you don't even fully understand, you will intuitively know something that you shouldn't be able to know. I think this is a better use for the noose than looking around for someone of suitable size. So let's do this. This is the key that opens the lock. It is also marked with a ribbon so that there's no confusion. And over here, in this snifter, there are 4 more keys. Now, each of these keys is cut very similarly to this one, but cut just differently enough that it will not open the lock. Try one. Now, each of these keys is cut such that it will fit inside the lock, it will turn inside the lock, but to no avail, the lock will not snap open, correct? Now, we can tell the difference because of this handy ribbon, which is actually made of tissue paper. Max, I want you to take the glass and put your hand over the top, mix them up. Good. Step over to Jeff. And Jeff, if you would, reach inside and take out 1 key for yourself, just at random. That's good. And if you would move over to David and ask David to do the same. In a moment, one of you is going to feel that he or she is holding the key that works. You'll know it, and I want you to act upon it. Do not look for outside guidance. It's going to come from inside you. And when you say to yourself, I think I've got the key that works, simply stand up. We close at 2. Now, David, did you feel something? Did you think something? What was the experience? Just somehow it came to you, you said, I think I've got the right one.
Yeah. By some means, nonverbal, Max has conveyed to that one person that holds the right key that they've got it, and that they should be aware enough and brave enough to actually stand up in front of hundreds of other people and walk forward and try their key.
So the question at this point has to do with that lock and your key. Would you walk over to the lock? I would like you to insert the key into the lock, but do not turn it. We know that all 5 of the keys will fit, but only one of them, when turned, will produce that satisfying snap.
And what's really lovely about that is it's not about Max getting it right or wrong. It's about how is this very specific, impossible communication happening?
Listen for it.
And like any artist, what he does transcends the tools that he has chosen to use.
That artist has remotely caused you to go through some transformation or some sort of reconsideration of the way you think or the way you see the world. And I think when, Max is really at his best and really on, he can do that for you as well through these demonstrations or through his storytelling.
The most important thing in Max's work is not precisely what he does, but the fact that he does it artistically and in a way that no one else has ever done it. He's an original.
I started my investigation by asking Max a question. I wanted to know whether what he does are simply tricks or something more. Having the pleasure of joining some of Max's esteemed colleagues in the audience, I now realize that was the wrong question. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They're meant to be savored.
A few years ago, I turned 50, and a month or two after that, I was browsing in a bookstore, not an unusual activity, and I came across a quote from Hokusai. Now, Hokusai was the 19th century Japanese ukiyo-e graphic artist. He did the wave, that famous iconic image. And I came across this quote, and the quote was, "I was born at the age of 50." And this made me feel great. This notion that Hokusai was saying that he didn't really get it until he was 50 years old. Literally on my 51st birthday, I was in Tokyo and browsing in another bookstore, and I came across a later quote from Hokusai in which he said, "All of my work before the age of 70 was shit." And this made me much happier because it told me that there's still room to grow. So thank you for letting me share with you what I've learned so far.
Here we are on our 4th conversation, and this is also the time where you're celebrating the first 40 years of your career, gearing up for the next 40 years of creations. How do you see things when you look back to these 4 decades?
Well, it's been approximately 40 years, and at some point, not so recently, but not in the beginning, but at some point I began to see kind of a structure, not intentional. And I now look at my career, my professional career, my artistic career, my creative career, and I see that it divides into 4 phases. Each phase is about 15 years, and they overlap. and I'll define them for you. The first phase begins in the mid-1970s when I first started trying to be a professional performer. It lasts about 15 years till approximately 1990. And I look at that as my learning phase, in that it was during that period that I really learned my craft and the details and techniques. I was working a lot, learning how to manage an audience, learning how to recover from mistakes, learning how to adjust feeling in the room, learning how to work long form, learning how to work in short form, building a repertoire. And that was that phase. The second phase begins about the mid-80s, so there's an overlap. And I call that my explorative phase, where I sort of said, not consciously at the time, but okay, I know how to do this stuff now. Not perfectly, but I have a good solid foundation. So let's explore different things to do with it. And it's really during that period that I started doing more performing in other countries, working with different language situations. I started doing a lot of television. I'd done some before, but it was really in the 80s that I really plunged into that world. It was in 84 that I did the Max Maven's Mind Games video, an interactive video at the very early days of the home video market. I did some series. It's at that point that I started learning how to be an MC. So that was exploring, building on a solid foundation and saying, okay, what about this new combination? The third phase begins in the mid-1990s and runs up to about 2010 approximately. And that phase is my artistic phase, where I kind of said, okay, I have a solid foundation of technical skill and ability, a solid repertoire. I've tried lots of different types of performing. Now what can I say with it? How can I express myself artistically? It is during that phase that I did my first theater show. The first was actually in 1988, and I did a 2-hour show that I think was good for its time. But in the early 2000s, I went back to that show. I tore it apart, put it back together again, having taken out all of the material that I felt did not move the ideas forward, even some of the strongest mentalism. And in the show, I talk about people and things that have influenced me, not magicians. I talk about people like Alexander Woolcott, literary figure from the 1920s, and Paul Erdős, who was a Hungarian mathematician, and Pablo Picasso, and others. So it's a show which brings together a lot of the things that help form me artistically and filters that through selections from my mentalism repertoire. So that show was first done about 10 years ago. I still do it, not all the time, but I think it's probably the best show I've ever created as a piece. It's 2 hours with an intermission, and I like doing it. So obviously, by now, I must be into the fifth phase, assuming that things are going where they're supposed to go. That phase should have started in the mid-2000s, and I'm probably something like 9 or 10 years in. I don't know that I can fully identify this phase yet because I'm in it. Maybe this phase is just a continuation of the previous phases. I don't know. But I'll say that the one thing that has changed in the last 10 years is my expanded interest in the history of magic and the theory of magic. Now, I had interest in both going back a long time, but I feel like my ability to understand that history and understand these theories, and to some degree at least articulate them, has really become not finished, but more complete during the past decade. I'm seeing patterns now where I couldn't see them before. So maybe that's the definition of this phase. I'm not sure.
Well, each of the first phases, they were apparently powered by desire and vision. So if you are not analyzing the facts, what is the desire or the vision for this fifth phase?
Well, I think in recent years, I've become more interested in the question of why. You know, the earlier phases were what and how, and to some degree who, and by necessity where and when. But now I'm really interested in why. Why does this pull me into it? What am I trying to say? Where will I be thinking later? I mean, my thinking has evolved. I don't think the same way that I did 10 years ago or 30 years ago. So I don't know what my thinking is going to be if I get another 10 years. But I'm interested in finding out.
Well, we'll be here to find out. And meanwhile, we can look back to facts. There are a couple of very distinct moments in your career and in your accomplishments, and we need to discuss them or start to understand them. For instance, your relation with interactive magic. Mm-hmm. Where did it come, and how did you find the perfect place to express yourself in that area?
Well, one of the original inspirations was an American television show for kids back in the 1950s called Winky Dink. And Winky Dink was a cartoon character that looked sort of like a star with a face in the middle and little arms and legs. And the idea was you would send off some money, not much, and they would send back a piece of plastic, soft plastic, that you could put onto the front of the TV set, and it would stick there. And then you had some special crayons that could write on the plastic. So in a show, the cartoon of Winky Dink, for example, he would be on the top of a mountain, and he needed to get to the top of the next mountain. And the voiceover guy would say, "Help Winky Dink by drawing a bridge." And so you would take your crayon and you would draw a bridge, and Winky Dink would walk across it. I thought that was unbelievable. It was really exciting. Another strong early influence was a cartoon, but in this case, a better-known cartoon. There was a Daffy Duck cartoon done by Warner Brothers called Duck Amuck. And it was very self-referential in a very sophisticated way. At a certain point, Daffy Duck got caught in between the frames of the projection. So it was a meta piece, and it wound up just tearing apart all the basic traditions of narrative in film or in TV or in animation. And I like that a lot, too. I began exploring interactive magic, which kind of addressed both of those ideas, really in the early 1980s. And I started developing material. Now, I wasn't the first to do this. There were some others who had been there first. Martin Gardner, and then Carl Fulvus had published some very good ideas with this. Harry Blackstone Sr. had put out a record with his voice talking you through a self-working card trick that you would do on yourself. You know, so Martin Lewis had put out a record album with some interactive magic on it. So there had been some stuff, but not a lot of it. And I got more and more interested. And originally I wanted to do a book that read your mind. Chan Canasta did such a book back in the 60s called The Book of Oopses. But I had kind of my own ideas as to how to go about this, but I couldn't get it purchased. I pitched it to a couple of publishers who didn't want to do it. And then a friend of mine, Mark Nelson, who worked at the Magic Castle as a host at that time, had some connections in the new industry of home video, and he connected the project to MCA, which is part of Universal Studios, and they bought it, and we did it. Mark was the producer, and the result was Max Maven's Mind Games, which was ahead of its time. Didn't sell very well because the video stores didn't know where to put it. They didn't have a shelf
It was quite a big production. I mean, a big budget involved.
Serious money was involved, some of which went to me. And it looks pretty good, even to this day. So that was an opportunity. After that, I also did interactive pieces for various television shows. I became sort of known for this. When Gary Ouellette and some others started producing magic on television in America in the mid-90s, they came to me and said, we want an interactive piece, or maybe two. And I said, great. So I was on the first show, which got huge ratings for complicated reasons. Not only because it was a good show, but it was pretty good. But the next year I was booked back, and I was also on the fourth. They did 5. And then I did other shows. I've done interactive work over the years. I did an interactive computer disk for the Philips organization for their CDI system.
You designed one for me for my first website in 1996?
Yes, I did. The funny thing about the interactive stuff is that most magicians hate it because they look at it and they say, well, that's too easy to do. There's no sleights, there's no skill. And what they don't understand, but you do more than most, is that when you're talking on camera and you have to walk from one mark to another and be really precise and get all the timing perfectly, because in television, 10 seconds can make a difference. These things are not that easy. I mean, first of all, someone has to write and invent them. Let's start there. But even the performance is not as easy as it looks. But I'm perfectly okay with magicians saying, well, that stuff it's too easy, because they aren't being asked to do it.
Even at the Caesar's Magical Empire, there was a, what was the name, Maximus?
It was called Maximus Maven. It was a projection of me. People thought it was a hologram. It was actually a Pepper's ghost projected from a hidden laser disc. And I would appear in a puff of smoke about this tall, wearing a toga, as if I was an ancient Roman, and walking around the shelves behind the bar and doing interactive pieces. There were 6 of them, with people sitting at the bar.
In your opinion, what makes an interactive trick a good interactive trick?
Well, things have changed. Originally, it was creating the illusion of interaction, because, of course, on a video, which is one recording that is linear, interaction isn't really happening. But creating the illusion that it is kind of wonderful. And then as things got a little more sophisticated, doing these computer versions, for example, you could do actual interaction of some sorts. In the early days of home computing, there were text games before the graphics existed to do nice-looking graphic games. And the early ones that were successful had names like Zork and Amazon something or other. I mean, they were quirky. And they were all typed. So it would say, you are in a room. There is a door. And you would say, okay, open the door. You type that in. And it would say, the door is locked. So you would start looking around the room until eventually you'd find the key. But maybe you had to figure out that there was a table, and the table had a drawer. And eventually you'd get the key, and you'd go to the next thing. But what made the thing really great was sometimes you would get so frustrated because you kept trying solutions and you couldn't get there, that you would type in something ridiculous, you know, kick the door. And the program would respond with something that was appropriate. Now the door is hurt because you kicked it. And this illusion that it was actually responding to you intelligently was quite compelling. There was an early computer program done at universities called ELIZA, which was a Rogerian psychiatrist. And it would interview you based on what you typed. But that form of psychiatry is mostly rephrasing. So the program would say, how are you? And you would say, well, I've been feeling lonely. And it would say, you say you're feeling lonely. Go on. And people, when they tested this, many of them were sure that there was another human being at another terminal somewhere typing. But even the ones who knew that it was all artificial software, after several minutes would request privacy because they felt they were being too intimate for other people to share. In the 1980s, I wrote some interactive computer programs. They were primitive, but they worked. And they did magic tricks on you. And one of them did conversations. the program was not only able to discuss topics that you would introduce and give you responses that made sense, but at a certain time, if you had typed in that your name was Luis, later on it would say, you know, I don't really know you well enough, or I know you too well. And it would give you either the nickname for that name or the formal name for that name. So with Luis, it might say, it feels too formal to call you Luis. I'm going to call you Luisinho. And it would be the correct nickname for that name. So Robert became Bob, or Bob became Robert. Mm-hmm. And the moment when that happened, the people who would play this program would be shocked.
Definitely more surprising than Candy Crush or Puzzle Bubble or Farmville.
Yeah.
But when it comes to magic, I mean, if someone is looking to work on interactive magic, what do you think is the best source, or what are the characteristics that can somehow point to a successful interactive experience in that manner?
Some of the best ideas that I learned when I was starting on this came from Martin Gardner, who was just a brilliant guy and a constant source of inspiration. He wrote a column for Scientific American magazine for 25 years. And my father, being a scientist, he subscribed. And I was reading Martin's column from about the age of 8 or 9. And some of it was pretty heavy, and some of it I couldn't understand, but some of it I could. And Martin was a very accomplished magician, and so magic would show up in this series, but also things relating to magic in related areas, including some interactive stuff. So that was a strong learning source for me, and it's still available. So I would say it's not the only place to start, but it's a good place to start.
So let's go to television. Television, an area in which you have an amazing experience, internationally, different formats, starring, co-starring, being a guest. How do you see the evolution of television, and do you think that eventually it will come to a circle and go back to what it was, or it was so derivative till now from 20 or 30 years ago that now it's a little bit of a lost art?
Television, as with other media and as with other aspects of popular culture, goes through booms and waves, and things become popular and then they go down again. You know, just before those American Magic specials started in the mid-90s, there was almost no variety entertainment on American TV. The Ed Sullivan Show in the 50s and 60s into the early 70s had lots of variety. But that stopped, and the form changed, and there were no variety shows. And you would see a magician or a juggler on television in America literally like 4 or 5 times a year. That was it. And that suddenly changed drastically, you know. So you had the Doug Henning and then David Copperfield period, where they were doing great work on television, but it was once a year most of the time. And then even that faded down in the 90s, and then suddenly it kicked up again. And now there were lots of television shows happening in the 90s, and it was during that period when the wave was still going that David Blaine came along and redefined magic on television with some really fresh and exciting ideas that showed a very deep understanding of the television medium, how he reframed things. And we know that because there were suddenly copies of David Blaine all over the world. You know, in every country, producers said, we need to get one of those. And so there was a Blaine in this country and a Blaine in that country. And it kind of set the template. There hasn't been anything really substantial in the way of changing that definition since. There have been good production values on things. There are a few people who are pushing the envelope a little bit in television. In the US, Michael Carbonaro has been doing this series where the magic is not presented as magic, but it happens when Michael is apparently the clerk in a store. And it's very well thought out and very well done. It's a new take on magic that has roots that go back, but is very fresh, and it feels that way. Frankly, most of the magic I see on international television in recent years isn't very interesting because it feels like you've seen it before. But every once in a while, someone comes along and does something radically new, not only in television. You know, at the moment, in Los Angeles, as this is being recorded, there are 2 live magic shows happening, not counting the Magic Castle and all of that. Helder Guimarães, who is from Portugal, is doing a show called Borrowed Time, which is very innovative and different and fresh. And then Derek Del Gaudio is doing his new show, which is called In and of Itself. And that's a bigger physical production. Helder's show is deliberately small. Derek's is in a larger space, although not a huge space. And they're both carving out new ideas. They were working together for a while. Now they're doing separate projects. Neither of them has done much television that I know of. But I'm excited at the idea that they might, because if they bring the same level of creativity and of changing the rules to television, it will have a bigger impact and could change things, so that if we have this conversation a few years from now, whether it's from those people or others, it could suddenly be a completely different format. And we'd be saying, remember the old days when it was this style.
Talking about live shows, I'd like you to let us in a little bit of what it is Max Maven thinking in person. What's the concept behind? How did the production came to be what it is today? And what I've heard you saying before, which is the show, it's about the last 10 seconds.
Well, the starting point for the show was in 1988, because I thought to myself, I've been working nightclubs and television, but I haven't done a theater show. I've worked in theaters, but I haven't done my own theater show. And I thought that would be an interesting thing, because it would force me to rethink my material. Because the contract, the relationship between the audience in a theater is different than the audience in a nightclub or a banquet or in a TV studio. So I put together this show, and it had a 3-month run at a theater in Beverly Hills. And it succeeded. It was well received, and I enjoyed doing it. I learned a lot doing it. And I did a couple of subsequent runs of a couple of weeks here and a couple of weeks there, and then my attention turned to other things. And then in the 1990s, Ricky Jay had a show in New York called Ricky Jay and His 52 Assistants, which was a big hit. It became the most sought-after ticket in New York. And it was a great show. It deserved to be successful. But as a result of its success, suddenly there were magicians in lots of different cities in the United States doing their own one-man shows. And I thought, wait a minute, I was doing this first. I was doing this back in 1988. I should remount my show. And I said that to myself for a decade. But I didn't do it. And then at a certain point, I changed from saying I should do that again to I will do it again. But once I started thinking seriously about it, and this was in the very early 2000s, I realized that to remount the show that I had done in 1988 was a mistake. Because the show in 88 was a very good representation of who I was and what I was trying to express in 1988. But now I was a different person with a different vision and different ideas. I was more mature. I was more developed. So I went through the original show and I took it apart. I deconstructed it. I always picture this as taking a watch apart. So you have a spring over here and a gear over here and just this mess of pieces that don't work anymore because you pulled them apart. And then I took everything in the show that didn't advance the concepts and I pushed it off the table, including some of the strongest mentalism in the show. Well, now I didn't have a full show. I added one routine that post-dated 1988. But that still gave me a show that was maybe 70 minutes long. And I wanted it to be a 2-hour show with an intermission because I liked that structurally, and there are things you can do with that structure that don't work in a single unit. So I said, what will I put in to replace the missing time? It took a while, but I realized that I didn't need to put in more mentalism because the mentalism that was in the show I felt was doing what it was supposed to do. So instead, I wrote monologues about people and things and ideas that had influenced me. One of the monologues was in the 1988 show, but now there were a bunch of them. The show has less mentalism than many people might expect. A few magicians have been irritated by that. Oh, there wasn't enough tricks in the show. real audiences seem to be perfectly happy with it because, you know, Tommy Wonder, who was one of the greatest magicians ever and a dear friend, and Tommy used to say in his lectures, he would say to the magician groups, I know you'll find this hard to believe, but please trust me. Every night of the year, in theaters around the world, there are shows where people pay money to attend. And they sit through a show that is 1 or 2 or more hours, and there isn't even a single magic trick. Really, it's true. So, in my show, there's some strong mentalism, but it's not only that the show is about. And in the first act, the first approximately 1 hour, I only do 4 routines. And the rest of it is these monologues. And during that act, the audience is a little bit perplexed. They say, okay, there are 2 shows going on here. There's a mentalism show, and there's a story show, monologues. And they are joined by the fact that they're being done by the same person on the same stage in the same night. But I'm not sure I fully understand how they fit together. And then in the second act, what happens is that those 2 shows come together and merge. And by the very end of the show, everything is completely waterproof, solid, stable. Everything fits together. And it all concludes with the last 30 seconds of the show. And the whole show is really about those last 30 seconds. It takes 2 hours to get to those 30 seconds, and it took a little over 30 years to get to those 2 hours.
Probably some of the persons that are watching these DVDs and listening to your words, they might have seen you on a magic shop or a magic convention or outside a theater, and they didn't want to go to you the same way they didn't want to go to Dunninger and say, hello, Mr. Max Maven, I'm a mentalist as well. But I'm sure that with your experience and being such a prolific creator and established and experienced performer, what is the best kind of advice that you can give to someone trying to pursue a life dedicated to magic? Because that's what it has been for you so far.
I can answer this in a number of different ways. I can give some practical advice, which is read everything. You won't finish, I haven't, but it'll get you started. I think one of the best things a young performer can do is to join an acting group, be in plays, even if they have no interest in becoming an actor. But what that does is it gives them time on stage, time to interact with audiences and get an idea of what that is about. So there are acting groups in every city. Usually you don't get paid. They're small community theaters, but that's not the point. The point is you get experience. I remember years ago, and I probably wouldn't say it this way now that I'm older and more mellow, but a young guy came up to me once, early teens. I was probably in my 30s. And he said, what advice would you give me? Because I'm interested in becoming a professional mentalist as I get older. And I said, I can give you 3 pieces of advice. First, you have to be prepared to starve. It's very difficult to break into show business. It always has been. And success is not guaranteed. And if you can think of anything else that you would rather do or be equal, then do that, because it's going to be easier. The second thing is you have to be prepared for a very uneven lifestyle, because 1 month you're doing well, 1 month you're not. You're uprooted because you have to travel, so you don't necessarily have the ability to sustain personal relationships. It's just not a very stable life the way most people think of their lives. So you have to accept that reality. And the third thing is, if you want to be a professional mentalist, you must accept the fact that you will never be better than second best. That's what I said then.
On a less lighter note, when you look into history, there seems to be a pattern that somehow relates successful mentalists with some sort of troubled characters, but there seems to be some examples there. My question is there a problem when you are in an area like mentalism that you are betrayed by the belief and then you might become a shut eye, or you don't know where to draw the line?
It's an interesting question, but I'm not sure it goes very far with me. I certainly think there are important issues that any mentalist, anyone who enters that field, has to think about seriously. There are moral, ethical responsibilities about doing mentalism, and someone's answers to that, someone's decisions about that may be very different than mine. I don't care if someone has made different decisions. I just care that they thought about it. What I think is reprehensible is a mentalist who'll say anything just to get a job or just to get a reaction. But if you've thought about it and decided what you're comfortable with, then that's probably okay with me. I mean, I suppose past a certain point it's not, but it's probably okay with me. One important image that I thought about years ago, and I sometimes say to this to people who are trying to start to have a career, is I say, you have to remember, how does an oyster make a pearl? What happens with an oyster and pearl is that a piece of sand gets trapped inside the very soft membranes of the oyster's body, which is inside a shell. But it's very tender in there. And the piece of sand is irritating to the oyster. So it exudes a substance, a liquid, that it builds around that piece of sand to make it smooth, spherical, so that it no longer hurts. So if you expand that metaphor, sometimes to make something beautiful, it requires irritation. It's also worth remembering that Federico Fellini once said that the pearl is the oyster's autobiography.
Beautiful image. And how do you feel about the latest boom, fashion, trend, which is clearly happening nowadays? I mean, there's every day seems to be a new mentalist in the scene. Maybe I should not use the word mentalist, but I use it just to express this absolute replication of mentalists right now.
Well, there is a huge boom of interest in mentalism for the past decade or so. I have to say most of it I'm not very impressed. There are some major exceptions. Most of the mentalists I've seen who are younger are being very derivative. Most of them are imitating Darren Brown. Darren is wonderful, very much his own persona, his own manner. The material is really strong. But, you know, back when it was videotape instead of digital, when you would make a dub of a tape, the dub was a little less sharp, a little less clear than the original. And if you then made a dub of that, the next dub was a little less clear and a little less sharp. And by the time you got to the fourth or fifth dub, it was mostly snow. It was very blurry and hard to watch. And unfortunately, derivative performers seem to get blurry in the same way. Most of what I'm seeing doesn't really go anywhere. I always want someone to take me somewhere I haven't been. And that's not only true in mentalism, it's true in everything. There's an American writer named John Lahr who mostly writes about theater, and he's quite good. And a number of collections of his essays have been published as books. And one of them, the title is Astonish Me, because that's what he wants when he goes to the theater. And I think that's a great thing to want when you go to the theater, when you go to see any type of performance. Astonish me.
We all have been exposed to one of the most famous works of Hokusai, The Wave, both on your wave trick, but also I have heard you more than one time mentioning something that I would like you to remember here in this conversation regarding the way he saw his work over the years and how that should be humbling or not for whoever is starting.
Okay. Hokusai was sort of the Dai Vernon of ukiyo-e, Japanese woodblock printing. In the 19th century, he was just the top guy. He was so innovative, and his sense of form was so beautiful. The use of the iconic image of the Hokusai's wave on the packaging for wave was Stephen Minch's idea. Stephen produced that trick in the United States, and Stephen is one of my closest friends, and we have a shared intellectual humor, and there's an intellectual humor to that choice, almost like an inside joke. But the story about Hokusai that I believe you mean is this. When I turned 50, a couple of months later, I was in a bookstore. And I was browsing. It was a used bookstore, so lots of interesting and eclectic books. And I came upon a quote from Hokusai in which he said, "I was born at the age of 50. And what he meant by that was that all the work that he'd done, all of the struggles, all of the attempting to learn, didn't really come into focus until he was 50, that's when he felt he perhaps understood his work. And that made me feel great, because I just turned 50, and I said, I get a connection with Hokusai, and that's wonderfully supportive commentary, and I held on to it. That was nice. And 10 months later, on my 51st birthday, on the day itself, I was in Tokyo, and I was browsing an English language bookstore, and I came across a later quote from Hokusai, in which he said, "All of my work before the age of 70 was shit." And that made me even more happy, because it meant that I could continue growing, and that there was still a chance to learn more. And I still feel that way.
All of us that have the privilege to feel close to you and experience friendship and benefit from your incredible generosity to a certain group of persons, and I consider myself among that group, or at least I feel that, it was obvious to me, and I used to play with you with that expression, that from very early on, I kind of noticed that there is something that I insist to call the Great Wall of Max Maven. So my reading of the Great Wall of Max Maven is that there are the ones inside the wall, and we feel very privileged to be there, and there are the ones outside the wall, which might even feel threatened and far away, not knowing the incredible generosity and true friendship that everyone inside the wall feels. So my question is there a secret password to break in the Great Wall of Max Maven?
I don't know if there's a secret password. I think you're right that it's not easy to get close to me. Part of that, and this might sound surprising, but I'm actually rather shy. Probably formed from my experience as a young child and having difficulty relating with my peers. I also take friendship very seriously. So when I become someone's friend or accept them as my friend, it's a commitment of sorts. And I think I'm a good friend, but I don't take it lightly. So if I don't know someone yet and they sort of loudly burst in trying to be my pal, my reaction is to sort of shut down and to be polite. I try not to be rude, but I don't necessarily engage past that polite stage. It's hard to say what works in breaking through to get to me. I don't think there's a password. There are certainly qualities in my closer friends that are shared. I think it's fair to say that all of my friends are smart. That appeals to me. I mean, one of my favorite people is Matt King and his wife Jennifer, and they're both really smart. They're also super nice, and he's so funny, and he's an incredibly talented performer, one of the best, and with much more depth in what's going on that stage than may be apparent at first. It's a beautifully structured show, and his attention to detail is gorgeous. And certainly how good Mac is as a magician, as a performer, is one of the reasons we became friends, but it's not the only reason. And I'm not sure I can tell you exactly what the reason is. It's whatever that interesting combination was and is of his intelligence, his care for what he does, the amount of effort he puts in that may be invisible, but it's there. His loyalty, he's a very good friend from his end. And if I think about my other close friends, and it's not a wide group, it's not a huge group, but I think they all, in one way or another, kind of fit those qualities. So if you're watching this and you want to be my friend, first of all, don't be aggressive. Don't come running over and pretend you know me if you don't, because then I'll just get scared and shut down. And the second thing is, do something interesting. Tell me something I didn't know. Take me somewhere I haven't been. And maybe there's a chance we could become friends. You've certainly done that.
Well, you certainly took us to a place where we have not been before with Kayfabe. Just as an exercise, when you think about everything you have done and the things that you plan to do, and we move into a century or two from now when none of us will be here, how would you like to be remembered?
Wow. Boy, that's a difficult question. Obviously, I hope I'm remembered as having contributed some things back to something I love. I think I made some changes in the world of mentalism and magic. Some of the concepts that I introduced have now become very widespread. They aren't always remembered that they came from me. That's not too terrible. So I would hope that when people are talking about the history of magic and mentalism in the latter half of the 20th century into however far I get into the 21st, that they would at least say, oh, I heard he was very good. I heard he was a good performer and understood what he was doing and cared about it. But I would also hope that at least in some way, the work that I have done, and perhaps will still do, extends beyond the boundaries of magic and mentalism. One of the things that people tend to do is to look at magic as if it exists in a vacuum. And it doesn't. It's connected to everything else. And my work, and my thinking, and my life has been deeply affected by people who are not magicians or mentalists. I've learned from singers. I've learned from painters. I've learned from writers. I've learned from sculptors. I've learned from actors. I've learned from even a few politicians. I mean, I've learned from a lot of different people by trying to absorb what they do, and in some cases saying, that's an idea that maybe I can filter through my own work. In one of my early books, I wrote that I had learned some techniques for the performance of my mentalism from studying the films of Bruce Lee and Clint Eastwood. And people have asked me for years, okay, well, what were those techniques? And I never tell them. And I won't tell them now, except to say that on the performances that are on this very set of DVDs, those techniques are used. Because it isn't just about this little self-contained group and its self-reference. It's about a much bigger world. So I hope that many years from now, assuming there are any people left to think about it, that they won't simply say, oh, he was a good mentalist or a good magician or a good historian or any of the things that I specifically am defined as being. But rather, I hope they'll see me as part of a much bigger continuum and say, he was a piece within that larger puzzle. He helped make the full picture. He didn't waste his time.
Well, thank you very much for breaking kayfabe for us.
Thank you for having me. Of all the material in my repertoire, I think my absolute favorite is what you'll see now. It has the prosaic title of The Finger on the Fan. I have used it as the opening piece on probably 90% of my shows. I've also used it in the middle and even as a closer. I've done it in close quarters and in the largest stages. Luis liked the effect. He said, I'd like to have that on camera. I said, yes, let's do it. So we recorded it 5 times. You're about to see all 5. However, I'm not going to explain it. First of all, because I don't want to. It's part of my repertoire. Frankly, I'd just as soon you didn't try it. But even if you do, I'm not going to give you any help. It is based on years of experience, doing it thousands and thousands of times, and I don't miss. With that in mind, you might enjoy watching it. And now it is your turn to name a card. Any one you like. You don't have to like the card. It could be one you don't like, but just say the name of any card.
Okay. 5 of clubs.
5 of clubs, all right. I'm going to fan the cards out so that all of the cards are displayed to you from the back. Yeah? And now you decide whether we begin from your left or your right.
My left.
From the left. I shall start moving my finger from the left. And whenever you like, you call out stop.
Stop.
Exactly there?
Yeah.
All right. My finger really is on the very corner you said stop. Not even one card different, correct? Let me pull the card slowly so we know it's still the same one. Yeah? For sure? You could have stopped here, or here, or here, but you chose to stop here. What was the name of the card?
5 of clubs.
The 5 of clubs. Let me try something with the lady there. You can stay in your seat. Do you play cards?
Yes.
Oh, good. So you know the names of the cards?
Yes.
Okay. Can you say the name of your favorite card?
Ace of hearts.
Ace of hearts. Okay. I will show the cards to you with the backs to you, right? And you decide whether we begin from your left or your right. Left or right?
Right.
From the right. I will start moving my finger from the right. Whenever you like, you say stop.
Stop.
Exactly here?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. The people sitting close, you can see my finger is exactly on the card the lady stopped me on. I didn't move even one card extra. True?
True.
True. Still the same one? Yeah. Are we sure? What was your card?
Ace of hearts.
The Ace of Hearts. Let me try something very simple with you. You can stay where you are. Do you play cards? You know the names?
Yes.
Okay. Can you name your favorite card?
Ace of hearts.
Ace of Hearts. That seems to be a popular card. Do you want to change, or is that the one you really want? Okay. I'm going to fan the cards so that the back of each and every card is to you, like this. Okay? And we can do this from your left or your right. Which do you prefer?
From the right.
From the right. I will start moving my finger from the right. When you like, you say stop. Exactly here? No mistake? It's still the exact corner of the same card, yes? Still the same one? Sure? Okay, because you could have stopped me here, or down here. But you stopped me exactly here. A moment ago you named a card. What card did you name? What was your favorite card?
It was the Ace of hearts.
The Ace of Hearts. Can you help me? Yeah. I'll make it very easy. Please say the name of any card you like.
King of Hearts.
The King of Hearts. That's a romantic card. I think we learned something about you. I will fan the cards out so that the backs of all of the cards are in display to you, okay? So let me do that. A nice big fan. And you get to choose whether I begin from on your left or on your right. Which do you prefer?
On my left.
On your left. I will start moving my finger from the left. And when you like, you say stop.
Stop.
Exactly there?
Yeah.
All right. It's clear? My finger is exactly where she said stop. I didn't move even one card. No, it's exactly the same place. Let me pull it slowly. Because you could have stopped me here, or here, or here. Yeah. You stopped me directly here. Yeah. What was your card?
King of Hearts.
The King of Hearts. I want to try something very, very simple. Again, with a deck of playing cards. They're all here. And I will ask someone from the audience to help me, but they can stay in their seat. So I think this person will be you. Can you help me from where you are, okay? In a big voice, can you say the name of any card? It can be your favorite, it can be a normal one, it can be a popular card, whatever you like. Two of Hearts. That's a nice choice. It's kind of a romantic card. And he is smiling. Okay, I will make a fan of the cards so that you can see the back of every card. Now you tell me whether I begin from your left or your right. From the left. I will start moving my finger slowly from the left. And when you like, you say stop. Stop. Exactly on this card. Yes? The people in the front. It's precisely this card. Right? I didn't move even one card. This is where she said stop. Let me pull that slowly. Still the same one? Yeah. Because a moment ago you named a card. What card did you name? The Two of Hearts. Now you could have stopped here, or here, or here, but you chose to stop here. On the Two of Hearts. About 12 years ago, this question occurred to me. Who was the first close-up magician? And it intrigued me because I didn't know the answer. And in fact, I wasn't even sure how to go about trying to find out the answer. Eventually, it turned out that it's not that difficult a question. But in order to get to that question, you have to answer one that is difficult. And that question is, what is close-up magic? And if you ask most people in magic what close-up is, I think they will say it has something to do with proximity. In other words, it's done literally close up, close to the spectator. But Robert Harbin, in the zigzag illusion that was discussed yesterday by Mike, he used to bring a spectator on stage so close that the spectator literally touched the woman who got into the box. And yet we would never consider that to be close-up magic. So maybe it has something to do with the size of the props. Well, billiard balls are fairly small, and yet they are a stage trick. If we think back to Nate Leipzig in vaudeville, he did card tricks standing on stage. Emil Jarrow ended his vaudeville act, which he did in theaters holding over 1,000 people, by making the transposition between a penny and a nickel. And yet that's not close-up magic. So obviously the size of the props is not going to help us with the definition. It seems like the definition of close-up magic is similar to the classic definition of art or pornography. I know it when I see it. Well, one way we can approach trying to address this problem is to look at the timeline involving the term itself. Close-up is actually a relatively recent term. The first recorded instance is in 1929 by Walter Gibson, and by a few years from then, it becomes a very common term. In 1930, the European term Mikromagie is introduced in Germany, with variations soon appearing in Spain, Portugal, and France. So this tells us that at that point, about 1929, 1930, 1930s, something is changing. Something in the definition of magic is changing that requires new nomenclature. In 1933, Di Vernon publishes 5 Close-Up Problems. In 1934, Jean Hugard puts out a book, Close-Up Magic. So the word is becoming stable. And it wasn't always that way. In fact, in the 1890s, the term that was used to describe small tricks done close to another person was pocket magic. And that stayed the more common term actually through the 1960s, believe it or not. Sometimes it was called vest pocket magic, which tells you something about the clothing people wore at the time. So clearly something took place around 1930, and that's probably where we'll find the first close-up magician. But let's go back to an earlier time, if I can show you the first image. This is an illustration, a graphic from Germany dating back to 1470. And it is, as you can see, a magician performing the cups and balls for an audience. This fits into what we normally think about as close-up magic. And yet somehow it doesn't seem to be quite close-up magic. And I think that's because there is something missing from this equation. And what I contend that is spatial definition. What we mean, in other words, is that in this picture that we just saw, the magician is performing on a kind of miniature stage. The audience is watching from their position. And I think one of the defining characteristics of modern close-up magic, once that word comes into use, is that in close-up magic, the performing space and the audience space are the same space. Now, if we go to our next image, that's only 10 years later, 1480, the famous Hieronymus Bosch painting from Holland, and you can see again, the magician is doing the cups and balls, a very standard trick that we associate with close-up. The audience is watching from the other side of the table, and the one spectator who's leaning forward and having a cut purse steal the money bag, is almost invading that space. You get the sense that they're breaking past a barrier that they're not really supposed to go past if you look at the positions of the people. In fact, if we look in the literature of magic, we find, for example, in Hocus Pocus Jr., the classic book published in 1634, in the introduction to the explanation of the cups and balls, it is stated, "He that is to play must sit on the farther side of a table." And now that lays it all out. The farther side. There is a defined difference. And if we look at our next image, we see that this continues forward through history. This is from the 1800s in Britain. And again, it is a close-up show in a sense, but the definition of space clearly separates to the performer and not to the audience. Maybe we're looking in the wrong place. So let's take a little sidestep and talk about earlier forms of magic that might be close-up, such as the Jadduwala men of India or the Gali Gali men of Egypt, the street performers, the pre-David Blaine street performers. This next image is from 1876, and it shows some Burmese street performers. And you can see that they are working on a rug, and the rug is a defined space. It's not a table, but it is a defined performing space that is separate from the audience. And in fact, if you look through the visual history of magic, I have not been able to find a single image showing an authentic street performance in the Middle East or in India or in the Asian countries in general where this stuff began. I have yet to find a single one that doesn't have some sort of demarcation stating that this is the performing area and you are away from that. It's not always with a rug. Sometimes it's a line literally drawn in the dirt. Sometimes it's just a defined space by the behavior of the performer. And this carries through into more recent times. This next image is only from 1936. And it is a classic, well, that isn't the one that I had. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. It is the one I had. No, go back to the first one. No, go back to the first one. That's the one. No, the orange one. There we are. That's the cover of Gene Hugard's book, Close-Up Magic. And you can see that the magician is standing at a table at a restaurant, and the spectators are sitting at the table. And the magician, in this Sid Lorraine drawing, he might as well be doing a stand-up act, because the space definitions, again, are very specific, that the stage is the portion of the table the magician has commandeered, as opposed to sharing. And if we now check the next image, no, the next one, no, that's giving the game away. The one in between, forward, one more, that's it. That's Di Vernon at the Kit Kat Club in 1936. Now this is a posed photograph, it's not taken in the actual moment, but I think we can agree, based on, among other things, discussions with Di Vernon and some of the descriptions that are written from the time, that in fact, as this picture depicts, Di Vernon is using the close-up area of the table as his stage, and the spectators have moved back from that to observe and enjoy. Paul Rossini, who is the other notable person who you might say was doing close-up magic at that time, also took this same approach, and so his space was defined as separate. Curiously enough, his stand-up act, which he did on dance floors, technically is closer to being a close-up act, but that's another story. But what about some other people who might come to mind as early close-up artists? What about Alexander Herrmann? I mean, we know the stories that Herrmann would go into a shop and produce a ring from an egg or a dinner roll. Well, obviously the close-up performance area and the spectators area is the same area, because he's in the shop, that it belongs to the shop owners and the customers. And similarly, if we think about Max Malini and the descriptions of his work that was being done in the early part of the 20th century, certainly he didn't simply define the space as separate. The spectators were more physically engaged. So why doesn't that fit the definition of the first close-up magician? Well, I say it's because there is a second criterion that isn't fulfilled, and that is the formal contract. Now, when I say that, I don't mean a piece of paper with everything written out, but rather the idea that someone has gone to see a magic show that is a close-up show on purpose, and that it is an organized destination. And in the case of Herrmann, this is improvisational magic done in a store, so it doesn't fit that criterion. In the case of Malini, Malini's actual show was a stand-up show, and he did close-up as a means of advertising the real show. So, to me, Malini, who I think was brilliant, but he's a proto-close-up magician. He's almost there, but the tadpole has not yet become a frog. So obviously something has to be going on in society in order to get to this point where suddenly around 1930 everything changes. And I think we can quickly define why that happened and a little bit of what happened by going back to where almost everything starts in modern magic, the Industrial Revolution. Now, historians disagree as to when the Industrial Revolution actually started, but everyone agrees that by the middle of the 1800s, it was underway. And the Industrial Revolution changed society drastically. And one of the things it did was to create something that had not really existed before, and that is leisure time, or for the benefit of the Brits, leisure time. In that case, prior to the Industrial Revolution, the only amateur magicians were really rich, and they could afford to have someone either give them very detailed lessons or to buy very expensive props. But with the rise of leisure time on the part of amateur magicians who were not wealthy, that changed. They couldn't afford big props. They didn't have a place to perform using big props. They didn't have a home salon or what have you. And nor did they have the time or inclination to devote to difficult practice. This meant that they were ripe for purchasing pocket tricks. And again, the term pocket tricks starts becoming used in the 1890s because there is now this new market, which means that now there are all these new amateur magicians who are buying all of these pocket tricks and little piece of paper tricks and coin tricks that are inexpensive. You can carry them in your pocket. You can show them to your friends. And when you do that, you don't have the formal contract, but you do have the definition of space. And ultimately, professional magicians start to pick up on this, and they start doing professional close-up magic, where the contract exists, but also the space is defined. Now, where do they do this close-up magic? Well, mostly in bars. And the reason for that is that bars are very convivial, so it's a nice place to do intimate entertainment. In the United States, in the mid-1800s, there were a lot of bars. They were referred to as saloons or juke joints or honky-tonks. They were generally pretty rough places. The entertainment they featured was almost always simply loud music. And there were no women other than prostitutes who would be at these bars, so it wasn't a general social place. But this began to change as the 19th continued. In 1881, in Paris, a bar called Les Chats Noirs became the first cabaret, as we think of this term now. Initially, it offered entertainment in what today we would refer to as an open mic situation. In other words, members of the audience would be invited to come up and perform. But as this caught on, and the form started to spread through France and then Germany, increasingly these cabarets began putting on elaborate booked shows. And this in turn was perceived by the people who ran clubs in the United States. So by the end of the 19th century, we get in New York City what were referred to as lobster palaces. And these were very opulent restaurants. And they were somewhat expensive, but they were such that even not very poor people, but even folks who didn't dine out richly every night were able to go. And to make this more appealing, they started adding music. In the early 1900s, a cabaret in New York, a lobster palace named Maxim's, added an orchestra. And in 1909, they put in yet one more thing. They added singers who were disguised as diners. In other words, they were sitting having dinner, and then suddenly they would stand up and burst into song. So this type of entertainment started blurring the lines between performance space and audience space. In 1913, New York put in a new law that said bars had to close at 2 a.m. And this led to the rise of a lot of private nightclubs so that they could get around that law. And that'll be important in a moment, because private clubs kind of set the scene for something that's about to come. We take a minor diversion from 1914 to 1918, and that's for World War I. And the way that World War I figures into this story is that many Americans went over to Europe as soldiers, and when they were there, they experienced European cabaret. So the concept became more familiar, and so when they came back, there was a demand now for intimate nightclubs with entertainment. And then in 1920, in the United States, they passed something called the Volstead Act, a remarkably stupid law that was passed by the United States Congress, which outlawed alcohol. It didn't stop people from drinking, it just made it harder to do, and so this led to speakeasies. Speakeasies were kind of secret private nightclubs where you could drink, but it was all underground. And at least ostensibly not known to the police. So what this meant was that the nightclub experience became even more intimate. It was much more of a communal situation. And you had performers such as Jimmy Durante or Texas Guinan who would perform and involve the audience. Texas Guinan actually would go and sit in the audience and do her act while sitting at a table with customers, even though it was for the whole room. So this sets the scene for the first close-up magician. And I contend that the guy who fits that bill is in our next picture, which you've already seen, so I'll identify him in case you haven't figured it out. This is Matt Schulian. Matt Schulian was born in 1890. He learned card sleights when he was 12 years old and began doing magic. When he was about 24, he was drafted, went overseas in World War II, came back, did a stint running a grocery store, and then went into the family business, which was running a restaurant with a bar. He got busted, spent 10 days in jail, but after Prohibition ended in 1933, he was able to resume his bar with a public face, as it were. Now, he became well known in Chicago. He was not a bar magician, even though that's how he's often described. Because when he performed, he would walk around the bar and come sit down at the table with the customers. And if we take one more look, this is a picture of Matt Schulian in performance. And if you notice carefully on the table, the woman who's laughing has her hand directly in the performing space. And it's clear that her hand is in there because Schulian has essentially forced her to place her hand like that. He is explicitly here combining the performing space and the audience space. And to my way of thinking and to the research that I've done and the analysis I've tried to put together, that makes him the first person to meet both of these conditions, the definition of space and the formal contract, because people came to Schulian's on purpose. They came to see him because he was really good. And what does this all mean and what is it all for? That's for you to decide. I don't say that it's necessary that you agree with my analysis. I just think it's an interesting question to explore, and that perhaps some of the ways that I went about trying to answer this question might be a little different than what you would have done. So you can mix my ideas with yours and start asking your own questions.